Okay, so who would like to read the poem? Anne, I'm looking at you.
Okay. I doubt not God is good, well-meaning, kind, and did he stoop to quibble, could tell why the little buried mole continues blind, why flesh that mirrors him must someday die, make plain the reason tortured Tantalus is baited by the fickle fruit, declare if merely brute caprice dooms Sisyphus to struggle up a never-ending stair. Inscrutable his ways are, and immune to catechism by a mind too strewn with petty cares to slightly understand what awful brain compels his awful hand. Yet do I marvel at this curious thing, to make a poet black and bid him sing.
So do we have some first impressions?
It's a little bitter.
No, it's ironic. I don't think it's bitter.
Okay.
In what way?
To me, it's not bitter.
Yeah, in what way would you call it ironic?
I doubt not God is good, and then he lists all these bad things.
Yeah.
That he
It's almost like
considers God responsible.
It's almost like the first line is kind of viciously sarcastic.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're good. You do all these terrible things, but you're good.
It makes me laugh just because he literally has no understanding as to what God's plan is, and it's coming through with all of these difficulties in Greek mythology.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I mean, he's good. Why is life so hard? I don't get him, but he made me, so awesome. That's kind of like how I read the message. So that I don't know if that's how I came across, but
yeah.
Okay, I like that.
What do we make of these mythological figures? Like the use of them. When I think the speaker is likening himself to these mythological figures and his circumstances, and but
Well, it's a common language. It's like a shorthand. It's easy. I mean, anytime you mention Sisyphus, it's just that very clear image of like a task or a struggle that's never going to end and doesn't get you anywhere. And it's just an easy way to get across a complicated idea really quickly.
Mm-hmm. So kind of a little bit of an obvious question here, but what is the speaker's never-ending struggle?
being
black is something to say.
I see it as lighter than you all do. and I mean, that's a twist. You know, I doubt he's not, he's good, but look at all these horrible things. But then it's like he's talking about his own inspiration. You know, it's God-given. As a poet. And he has no choice but to sing.
See, and the thing that keeps bringing me back is the third to the last line, or the third to the last line. What awful brain compels his awful hand? Every time I read that, I'm like, but then it follows with like this great realization of it's so interesting. Like, I have no understanding of anything that's going on around me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's this ongoing struggle with being black or being a woman. I think there's so many different themes that could represent the ongoing struggles that he represents here. I'm still having a hard time with the blind mole, though.
Yeah.
I really don't get the blind mole.
It's just this tiny little thing.
He's stretching from some big Greek tragedy to an animal in the earth. But I mean, even so, a mole in the earth doesn't need to see. It's blind, but it's not really handicapped.
But I mean, he's not. It's just an example of something you can't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And you wouldn't want to be blind.
That's exactly right. I get that
you didn't
now.
want to, but you know. So to me, the whole point is that this awful God has taken this one person and bid him sing. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think it's. I kind of look at the majesty of it all. It's like the realization, like, we will never have an understanding of what God is. And so, what makes this insanely human to me is how he describes it. It's not that he's like in awe of God as Christians as we're taught to be. It's more like he's afraid of God, just like the concept of racism comes from the fact that people have a fear of what's different. Sexism, fear of what's different. Homophobia, the fear of what's different. Anti-Semitism, a fear of what's different. It's not that they're bad. It's not that they're good. It's just that they're different, and that automatically makes you afraid. And then you look at him say, awful God, awful hand. It's this unjustified, irrational fear that like kind of shapes his view, but at the same time he's like, but look at me. Like,
yeah.
It's just fascinating to me. Like, no matter if something is different and we can't understand it, we automatically apply fear to it. And it's just kind of...
The fear is like a knee-jerk reaction, and then his thinking mind is able to grab a hold of it and at least try to explain it to himself.
Exactly.
What do you make of the line, by a mind too strewn with petty cares to slightly understand? And then it goes on, what awful brain compels his awful hand? So is he kind of saying here that his human mind is actually full of petty cares? Which is interesting because we're talking about something that's big. We're talking about a life lived in discrimination, and but yet he himself, like the speaker himself, is identifying that maybe his mind is also wrought with something that's petty, something that's not quite as big and meaningful. What do you guys make of those lines?
A human being can understand God. We're taught God is good. Look at all this. Bad. But to me, what's important about the poem is that I've been blessed. I don't understand why I've been given this command to sing, and I do. So I see it as positive.
What reason could he have had for writing this poem in that kind of a very traditional form?
So, sorry, go ahead, Ann.
Because it's about poetry.
Excuse me?
It's what I've been saying all along. It's about poetry. That's what the poem is about.
Would you say that again?
It's about poetry.
Let's expand a little bit on that.
The poem is about the wonder of being a poet, being given the gift in this world that we can't understand. We don't understand why God does, mostly here, they're bad things, right? But, we pretend we do. We say God is good, blah, 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 but then all these terrible things happen in the world. Who knows why God does these things? And who knows why he would have made me a poet? And that's a wonderful thing.
The reason I'm with Ann about, I think this is light, is that he had all kinds of tragic things he could have referenced. He references the blind mole.
Yeah.
That's
That's
right.
trivial. It's silly. It's a silly example.
It's a petty.
If God could come down, it's like a joke. If God could come down and I could ask God any question, my first question would be,
Exactly.
you made the mole blind and over the earth the whole time? Not genocide, not
That's
slavery,
right.
not, all the things he experienced, not war, but the blind mole, explain that. And also, you made me a poet?
Yes. And it's not the other examples are from Greek mythology, which is distant from us. He doesn't.
I actually thought that was hilarious. That was actually pretty funny. I was like, why are you calling on Greek mythology to represent
Christian Judeo.
Yes, he
Yeah.
doesn't talk about lynching.
Yeah.
Doesn't talk about
Well, and so just also on a kind of a biographical note, that actually is very typical of Countee Cullen. He does a lot of, he actually kind of struggled with it throughout his career. He was trained in, these white-dominated institutions to write like a lot of other famous poets. Like John Keats is one of his biggest, is interesting because Keats wrote largely sonnets and largely in a very similar form and made a lot of mythological references. And so that's where his kind of educational background came from. But of course, in that framework, there wasn't a whole lot of opportunity to talk about things like race. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to talk about some of these things that were largely excluded from some of the most famous English poetry, which is what he was taught to write, but he didn't find necessarily his own personal identity in it. And he actually struggled a lot with that. And if you read some of his other work, he really oscillates between trying to do something that's a little bit more kind of Harlem Renaissance proactive, while also embracing this form that he learned, he loved and he flourished in. And as we can tell, he flourishes and does well. So
And that makes the last line even more impressive, to make a poet black.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not white like John Keats.
Yep.
I'm black.
Mhm.
So my whole experience is different.
Exactly.
But I'm also paid to sing.
Yeah.